Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 4, I believe, of Social Venture Partners bigBANG. My name is Creighton Webb. I'm the owner and CEO of SunWest Communications. We're a strategic communications, public relations, and public affairs firm based in Dallas, Texas. I want to welcome you all. We've got a fantastic discussion that's going to take place over the next 45 minutes. We're talking about adapting corporate social responsibility in a changing world, equity in corporate America. Before I go on, I want to acknowledge that there is a white male moderating today's panel, and it didn't seem appropriate to go forward without acknowledging the privilege that I've enjoyed as a white male in this world, and I think it's important that that be said aloud. And I hope that I, in all humility, can evoke and provoke a great discussion with our esteemed panelists today, and I appreciate the honor and the opportunity. We have an amazing discussion in store for you. Of course, it's no surprise to any of us that are joining us today that since the death of George Floyd on May 25th over Memorial Day, there has been a national conversation, a reckoning, some have called it, long overdue around racial equity. And of course, it's provoked other conversations around gender equity and equity in general. And of course, today we're focusing on corporate America. There have been countless social media statements, some that have resonated well and others not, issued by corporations across the country, new policies written, new procedures, but some corporations, represented specifically by our guests today, have been at this work for a long time, whether it's gender equity or racial equity. And we're going to dig in today to learn a little bit more about what these folks and their companies have been doing. I want to encourage you to go to the SVP website to read more about these folks, excuse me, in their bios. They are impressive, but let me go ahead and introduce our guests just by title and we'll jump right in. There's nothing worse than saying on my left or on my right on a screen like this in Zoom, because you don't know who's on your left or who's on your right. But first, let me introduce Kimmelyn Harris. Kimmelyn is with Bank of America and is Senior Vice President and has been working on the equity issue within Bank of America for a number of years. Also joining us is my former colleague who has the dubious distinction of having worked with me for 12 years. Julia Simon is the General Counsel, actually now the Chief Legal Officer and Chief Diversity Officer for Mary Kay Inc., based in Dallas, Texas. And also Lynn Puckett, who is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Celanese. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I appreciate you being part of the conversation. You know, I thought we'd start, just because our audience doesn't really have a chance to get to know you here first thing in the morning, really with more of the personal. And I was hoping, if you're willing, if each of you would be willing to share a little bit about your personal story, your personal journey or experience as it relates to race and equity throughout your life, throughout your corporate life. Some of you have written about this, and I'm speaking specifically about Julia, wrote a fantastic article over the summer about her son's experience in their own neighborhood. And I'm also curious about your reactions following the death of George Floyd. Julia, if you don't mind, let's start with you.
Oh, sure. So this is going to go quick. It's going to sound like I'm going to take forever, but it's going to go quick. So I start out by telling people to give some perspective that I was born in 1967, which is 3 years after the original Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's a little over 10 years after Brown versus Board of Education. And so I give people that perspective because what people don't realize is my siblings, my older siblings, desegregated the schools. they desegregated the high schools and in Houston, where I grew up. And so when we start talking about race, it takes me back to, as a child, remembering seeing my dad have to go up to the high school to make sure my brother and the team members who were now at the new high school could play on the football team and those kinds of things. That was in my lifetime. And so I share that just because as you fast forward to the recent events, it's sort of we think we're making progress, and we are. There's no question we're making progress, but it has not been that long. And so part of what's so important about this talk about diversity and inclusion and those kinds of things is that there are attitudes that existed in our lifetime for people who are in their 50s, where there are a lot of attitudes that have got to come along with this. You know, when I talk about my own personal journey, you know, I talk a lot about starting out as a labor and employment lawyer in, you know, the early 90s. And so what perspective that brings is I kind of knew my rights and wasn't sort of afraid to speak up. And so in terms of, did I ever feel discriminated against? You know, honestly, and at work, not really. It could have been I was just oblivious to it, but not really. And what I mean by that is that's not. I sort of feel like I presented myself as you're going to accept me for my work and my skills, and again, having that labor and employment background helped with that. And then that takes me very quickly to the story most recently post George Floyd. I know we're not talking about the companies yet, so I'm just going to talk about my personal experience as you asked, which is, yeah, I've lived in the same general area in North Dallas since 1994. And the house I live in now for 20 years. And I felt very comfortable in my neighborhood, right? There are different people in the neighborhood. You know, there wasn't a lot of diversity when we came there initially, but there's a good chunk of people who have moved into the neighborhood over the years. And so when my son was out jogging when the pandemic first started, and you know, they were still in school and he was supposed to be doing his exercises, and someone says to him, a woman says to him, get out of this neighborhood. You know, it was sort of like, what are you talking about? And I kind of wanted to go find the woman and ask her, what the heck are you talking about? Why are you telling my son, who's probably lived here longer than you, that he's got to get out of this neighborhood? Why are you making that assumption? And so that those things still exist in 2020 is a big deal. And I'll kind of stop there because I could take up the whole time.
Thank you, Julia. Kimberlyn, let's go to you. Start with your reaction after you saw the video of George Floyd's death. What went through your head?
Yeah. You know, so my initial reaction, and good morning, everyone. Really happy to join this discussion. My initial reaction was shock, just around the way the officers seemed to be not concerned about his well-being, not just the officer with the knee on the neck, but the other bystanders who were there and who were not in any way trying to intervene or calm the situation. So my initial reaction was shock. And then my second reaction was a sense of familiarity. You know, we've seen this before. This is not new. This has been going on for many, many years. And so there was a part of me, even though there was shock there, that was also disappointed that it was familiar. And it was another individual that was being impacted by police brutality. So, you know, what I felt, and I'm sure many Americans felt, was just the need to do something, you know, and not knowing what to do immediately, but just trying to think and challenge yourselves and others around, what can I do to really make a difference in this situation? The blessing and the lucky part for Julia, Lynn, and myself is that our work is closely tied, you know, to what's going on in the nation right now. And so I had the opportunity to come back to my teammates and say, you know, what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to make a difference that's impactful to this situation and where we are? This new sense of urgency to respond to what we're seeing over and over again. And I'll tell you my personal experience, which is I grew up in a really rural town in North Carolina. I live in Charlotte now, and I think Charlotte, you know, is a banking city, so it's very progressive. You have a lot of New Yorkers and a lot of big city folks who live in Charlotte. And what's interesting is that in Charlotte, sometimes I can put my guard down around who I am as a Black woman, you know, who I am in this city. I can walk around, feeling pretty comfortable in my environment. But when I drive 2 hours to rural North Carolina to visit my family, I am shocked by the interactions that I and my family have with individuals on a regular basis. Encounters that I'll tell you, growing up in that town, I wasn't even aware that was a problem or that was an issue. You know, it took leaving that environment to even realize that the encounters and the responses that I was getting from some of the community folks was not what I should be getting. And so I'll tell you now, when I return, it's just pure disbelief that in 2020, that same thinking and mindset is still amongst us.
Really appreciate you sharing. I want to say, not your job to train or teach us to be anti-racists, and yet your willingness to share your personal experiences, and then particularly soon here how it relates to your job in corporate America is extremely helpful. Lynn, let's turn to you.
Sure. Starting with the personal, I was born in the South, but raised in the North. And I would go back as a child to relatives, older relatives, and the racism that I saw as a child in their normal behavior was shocking to a child. But I really, as I became an adult, thought that that was the old generation. I really thought it was something we had progressed beyond. And you see things like Breonna Taylor, you're aware of it. And I'm talking from the white privileged perspective, which wasn't a word I knew a year ago. It's just with the murder of George Floyd and these other atrocities, I think it's just a sea change. I think it woke everybody as a human being to the fact that this should not be how any country on earth is run, and especially not the United States of America. So that said, that's kind of my personal journey, but I wasn't alone on that here at Celanese. I don't want to talk too much about the company, but diversity and inclusion is a core value here. A ton of work's been done on it, but with George Floyd's murder, it was a sea change. We've now formed a diversity and inclusion council. And personally, one of the most impactful things that happened here since then was we had groups of employees come together, about 10 to 12 per group, all over the organization, different race, different gender, to listen to the podcast 1619 from the New York Times. And personally, I had no idea the kind of systemic racism was going on in banking, to this day. So I felt like I got awakened to things that I thought were taken care of, especially sitting in the law position. You think that's been done, you can't discriminate like that. And then to hear those stories was really shocking. So that's kind of my personal journey to where we are today.
That's actually a great pivot into where I want to go next, which is talking about your individual organizations. I'm sensitive to our audience, not necessarily wanting to hear a flag waving, banner waving, look at us, and everything that we've done in the past. But I do want to acknowledge that each of your organizations has a history in this space: DEI, gender equity. So give us just a tidbit of your past, as Lynn did, for foundational purposes. But would love to hear what since May 25th has happened in your organization and what steps you're taking, because I think a lot of us could really learn from that as you all represent a best practice. Kimberlyn, can we start with you in Bank of America?
Absolutely. And I like what Lynn just said around encouraging, teammates and employees at the company to be part of the conversation. And what I'll tell you is that, at Bank of America, we talk about advancing equity in the workplace, especially for women and especially for people of color. And what we're finding is that, within your organization, you really have to shift from talking about diversity and inclusion in a really broad way to really getting to the heart of the issues that impact women and people of color. Issues like representation and social capital and access to mentors and other areas. And so at the bank, what we're really trying to do is encourage courageous conversations. We're asking employees to join in group discussions where they can have open dialogue on topics that are important to them, topics that matter. And the goal of those conversations is really to promote inclusion. We really want folks at the company to know how important it is to embrace and appreciate everyone's background, their culture, their heritage, their experiences. We all come with our own set of experiences. And so to have real systemic change within organizations, employees really have to feel empowered to be their whole selves when they come through the door. At the bank, we have this thing that we say, which is bring your whole self to work. And what we understand is when we ask employees to do that, that means bringing in their societal issues and challenges and concerns that they're dealing with that impact their individual communities. And we want employees to feel empowered to do that so that we can be inclusive and that so we can have those conversations, that can be impactful and changing to everyone.
Great transition to Julia. Of course, Julia, enriching women's lives is the mission of Mary Kay. Conversations about gender equity have long taken place at Mary Kay headquarters, and more women in leadership at Mary Kay than ever before. But to Kimberly's point, how do you do this? How do you actually make sure that the change that you're making sticks?
Right. So, yeah, Creighton, you could probably speak about Mary Kay more eloquently than I ever could. So this is a funny dynamic here for me. But in any event, it is worth repeating that when you talk about the genesis of Mary Kay, we're talking about breaking through discriminatory barriers. That was the whole point of the company being founded. And so what's interesting to me, and sort of listening to both Lynn and Kimlin, is at Mary Kay, that knowledge piece was kind of there, right? The issue is, meaning the knowledge that you need to judge people by their skills and their ambition and their hard work, and not by factors like gender in particular, but also race and those other things sort of come with that package. What's so interesting about that post George Floyd is the realization that we became so confident and comfortable in our whole atmosphere and environment of we welcome all people, that you can get a little lax in really making sure, wait, but are we really thinking about it, and are we really being the most impactful, or are we relying on what we've always done? And so that's where we started, was, oh, we know, we just have to remind ourselves, and then we have to figure out, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do differently? Because knowing and doing are two different things. And so what's been so great about our reaction here at Mary Kay is we got to go straight into, what are we going to do? And so there's all kinds of things we've started working on. And so, I'll just say one thing, the things like employee resource groups and affinity groups and those kinds of things, we never really formally had a whole lot of those at Mary Kay, because everybody was always supposed to be bringing their whole selves to work. But what you realize is that sometimes you don't. You get caught in get caught in the bubble of, oh, we know we do these things right, and you forget there are things you need to do to make things better. And so that's what we've been focused on.
Yeah, but even your title, right, Chief Diversity Officer, how new is that? And isn't that symbolic? But more than symbolic as well, right?
Pretty new. Yeah, that's a really good point, Creighton, because if you had asked me a year ago, wait, why doesn't Mary Kay have a Chief Diversity Officer? I would have told you, and I will still say the same thing today, which is, oh, we all care about diversity at Mary Kay. So every executive team member is a chief of diversity, because everyone is supposed to be promoting that. And that's still what our messaging is. But the reason we needed a Chief Diversity Officer now is because we've got to talk about it, right? It's okay to do, and it's okay to be and feel, but wow, what a voice we can have in the community as we talk about. Every company should feel that way. Every person should feel that way about inclusion and making sure that we're making people feel comfortable, and we are doing things in the community. I think I told you this the other day, Creighton. Just saying the word Black, like, people will be wringing their hands about, oh, should I say African American? What can I say? Can I say, Hispanic? Do I say Latinx? What do I say? We're wringing our hands about these things, and even just saying, you know what, Julia, I don't know what am I allowed to say? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's think about it and to figure out what's allowed. But that we're even having those conversations that people care and are sensitive, but they also, as Kimlin talked about, it's okay to ask me. It's okay to ask me a question, and it's okay for me to have those conversations with people. Because I will tell you, again, 6 months ago, I was probably, and I'm a litigator by training, so making people feel comfortable was not always what people would first describe. But I realized I absolutely would, in these kinds of conversations, try to make the conversation comfortable. And how I've switched personally is, I'm not trying to make anybody comfortable. I have not been comfortable for years. Every time my son goes out, I am not comfortable. Literally, I'm not comfortable. And nobody else should be until we all are. That's sort of my point. That's a personal thought, not a Mary Kay thought, yeah. But still.
And Creighton, if I could just really quickly add to what Julia said, I think I love the last part that you brought home around making folks comfortable. I felt right after George Floyd, my neighbors were amazing. My coworkers would say, well, Kimberly, how are you feeling? what can I do? And I immediately felt like I should say, it's okay. We're okay. We're going to work this out together, figure this out together. And then I had this immediate thought on that. It is not my job to make folks feel comfortable. And I should speak from my truth and be honest about what I feel and say, it is not okay. Something has to change. And I need my white neighbors and my white colleagues to partner with me, to be my ally, to speak when they see something wrong. We have to do this together. And so I love what you said there, because we have to get uncomfortable if we want to see real change.
So if I could just add one comment to that, I completely agree with what both of you said. And as Creighton mentioned in the beginning, coming from the privileged position, one of my colleagues wrote a piece right after George Floyd was killed saying, I'm uncomfortable. And he posted it on our internal all-employee website. And he talked a lot about, as a white man, that he hadn't really thought about this and didn't know how to go about a conversation. And I think that freed up a lot of people in the company across the board to join these employee groups that listen to the podcast that I mentioned earlier. And we had very raw, frank, uncomfortable conversations where people opened up about their own situations, personal experiences, worries about their children, worries about the workplace. And through that, it was very much a bonding thing. But people realized, well, now we need to get serious about what do we do next? I mean, the communication opening up is critical, but we need to then start to say, what are our goals? How are we going to go about that? And that's very much what we're starting to undertake more seriously now. It's been going on here for a decade in terms of diversity, hiring goals and things like that. But I just think the conversation's taken on an entirely new focus.
Well, I'd love for you to build on that, because what strikes me in each of your responses is that, we're talking about equity in corporate America, but you see the personal bleeding into the professional in a way that I'll just say as a white male, I've never seen before, right? I mean, there are many things we just wouldn't talk about at the workplace. And I'm wondering if, in order to reach this or even have this conversation around equity in corporate America, that's absolutely necessary. So Lynn, talk a little bit more about how that's manifesting itself at Celanese. And I think in particular, one of the concerns I continue to hear over and over again is that this is just a phase, that this too will pass, the conversation will pass, and once again, we will have missed an opportunity for real sustained change. How do we make sure that doesn't happen in our corporations?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that personally.
Good.
But just a little bit about Celanese. So every employee logs onto their computer when they get to work. And the first thing that comes up is a screen that says the chemistry of us. We're a chemical company. And so I think that was kind of the heart of the fact that, as Kimlin said, bring your best self, your whole self to work. So starting back in 2012, we had our first employee resource groups starting to come together, from pride groups to women's groups, just to our Black employees group. So we had a lot of grassroots organizations coming up. I don't think that those coming up and the corporate strategy coming down had met in the way that I think they've met in 2020. And I think that's the difference that's really going to drive change. I mentioned we've formed a diversity, equity, and inclusion council, and that is really to set more aggressive new targets and goals. We have done recruiting in historically Black colleges and things like that. We do have half of our board is diverse, half of our executive team is diverse, and we have a woman CEO. So there are a lot of good gender achievements that have taken place at Celanese, but I think the race achievement is something that we're still working on. We track attrition, we track recruiting, and those targets I think are going to get more aggressive. I also think we're going to see more professional development dollars spent on trying to help people that might have historically not had the same advantages coming into a corporate situation, to help them succeed and try and close any gaps that are there. And I think that's a commitment you're going to see across corporate America that just, in my opinion, wasn't there before.
Kimlin, I'm curious, what has been the most surprising response that you've received so far? And let's limit it to since May 25th. Again, acknowledging that Bank of America and your leadership have had these discussions for a long time. but just over the last 6-7 months, most surprising, either positive or negative. And on the negative side, how do you bring those people in? How do you get them on board if they don't see themselves in this conversation?
Yeah, I'll share with you all that the most surprising thing, and I know so much surprising as it is shocking, is that, I've been saying to my teammates internally is that no good deed goes unpunished. So we've made our $1 billion 4-year commitment to advance racial equality and economic opportunity. And for the most part, we've gotten some really positive feedback from some of our competitors, from our clients, of course, from our employees. They're all really excited and engaged. But we've also received some feedback from individuals who aren't as happy with our commitment. And they're asking questions like, why do you feel the need to do this? Why is this important? How does this have anything to do with banking? I'm sure you've all heard it all before. And I'm most proud that from the top of our company down to the bottom, the response has been, it is the right thing to do. It is an urgent acceleration of work we've already started that we must double down on, that we must continue to do. The response is not, how do we pacify or make those folks comfortable in our commitment and in our efforts to advance racial equality. It is more so educating, stating the facts, and making sure folks understand the why around what we're doing, how we got here, thinking about the historical context, that this has not just come out of nowhere. There's a reason that we're here as a nation, and just reiterating that we all have a role to play if we want to see some systemic change. We not one of us, not individually, not one company, not one person can fix all of the challenges that are before us, but collectively we can do some amazing things. And so really surprised by that initial feedback that was not so positive, but I would say that's not so much as some of the positive feedback that we are getting.
Sounds like you've had to exercise even more than normal your grace muscle, right? I know.
Absolutely.
I know I find myself constantly asking as a leader for grace and forgiveness, because you want to engage in the conversation, but you're going to step in it. Sometimes you have to step in it and then not be afraid to continue, not just run away and run for cover. Julia, how about it, Mary Kay? Most surprising response, positive or negative?
Definitely not surprising. Our employee base rallied around the messaging we put out around, really just in response to George Floyd is where it started, because that's even before we started announcing the diversity inclusion efforts. Like most corporations, and this is, I think you asked this question, Flynn, and I'm going to blend a response to that into this answer as well, because I think what's important to remember is things are different, and what's different is you come at it from all different angles, but so certainly in response to George Floyd, pretty much every corporation in America decided they needed to make a statement about this. We as a culture decided it is not acceptable for us to not make a statement about what we are seeing here. Part of it could be, and you made a really good point earlier, Creighton, about sort of work and personal life. What's interesting about that is I think that has a lot to do with COVID. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I mean, work came to our homes and homes came to our work. And so we weren't allowed to separate it out because we were at home, forced to be at home around the country, as this, pandemic hit, but then as this social issue smacked us in the face and we couldn't turn away from it. And so that all of that happened at the same time, created a cultural shift. And then you cannot deny social media, not just social media, but Gen Z and Gen Y, because these young people are not playing with us. They are serious about holding companies accountable. They're serious about holding the adults in their lives accountable. And so I share all that just to share, when we start talking about Mary Kay, again, I'm proud of the company, and there's so much we can offer to this conversation because of who we are. But truly, it is every company in America is on a whole different pace. And so when you get corporate America to tell An NFL team, nope, you got to change the name of your team. That's a big deal. And that's happening over and over again. So I do think things will change, and it will continue, but it's going to continue because those young people are not playing. They mean it, and they're going to hold us accountable into perpetuity. It's not going to be a box checking kind of thing for them.
Well, and of course,
and Craig,
Kimberly, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to just add really quickly to what Julia stated about, the companies really taking a stance. I'm sure many of you saw last week that the Business Roundtable released their own advancing racial equity guidance and recommendations for corporations and governments. And what's amazing about that work is that there's 180 CEOs that are part of that conversation. So that speaks to the commitment that the Business Roundtable, been around for 50 years, know the importance of where we are as a nation and and the role that corporations and government, of course, have to play in really making impactful transformational change in where we are as a nation. So I just wanted to add to Julia's point that the sustainability comes back to the fact that we have 180 plus amazing corporations that have said, I want to be part of the solution.
So Lynn, so much here that's coming to you, right? So many questions all at once. Of course, Kimberly's great point about the CEO Roundtable. Most recently, a couple of years ago, said the bottom line isn't the only bottom line, right? We need to be thinking about corporate social responsibility. Julia's astute point that perhaps if not for COVID and if not for social media, we would not be having this conversation. Of course, in recent history, recent news here in Dallas, we see some very large national corporations taking a stand against a major advertising organization for a comment that its longtime CEO made in a meeting that then was leaked. And then, of course, the original question, Lynn, which was, what has surprised you most in the reaction of your employees internally? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that all on your lap and let you take which one of those that you like the best.
I'm probably repeating myself a little bit. What surprised me the most is how willing people throughout the organization are to open up and, to Julia's point, blend the professional and the personal in ways that are revelatory and also bonding, and I think very healing. But that process, some people get so upset they can't talk, other people cry. It's a raw thing that in my 30 years of working, I've never seen in the workplace. And I happen to think, I think it's COVID, I think it's all of those things. I think the toxic political environment in the United States, not to go off on that point too much, but I think that's had an effect. And one of the things that surprised me a lot was on one of these very diverse group conversations about race we were holding at work. A 50-year-old white Southern man said, I am not a racist, but everybody who looks at me and hears me open my mouth thinks I am. And I thought, what an interesting perspective, because I'm always thinking, I just don't think about that. So I think that kind of healing and getting it out there and having people look at me and say I'm a racist and I'm not, and let me share that, has been just a surprising and interesting and I think healthy thing that impacts the workplace in a very positive way.
I'm struck by your comment because I think, many of us who want to be involved in these conversations have to remind ourselves it's not about us, right? Especially those of us who've experienced unearned privilege, right? I don't want to turn myself into the victim. And yet, if I'm sharing, we're all being open, just like the gentleman you mentioned. And that brings us to a question that we've got from a member of our audience who, and I'm going to summarize it in a nutshell, they're interested in your response to companies that encourage their employees to be individualistic and unique, while also celebrating diversity as a core value. How do you, they ask, achieve the balance between, they use the words military-esque model, which is this is who we will be as part of a common culture, and yet letting people be an individual? Kimberly, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the earlier point that Julia and Lynn and I made, which is embracing the differences among individuals in your corporation. I go back to the point that how you balance that is, the culture at the company at Bank of America is not, this is the culture, you have to fit into this mold. It is bring your whole self to work, bring your challenges, bring your concerns, bring your perspective, because that perspective is going to be beneficial to who we are as a company. I was doing a little research last night preparing for this conversation, and I came across some really amazing data, and we all know it to be true, which is that diverse companies are more innovative and more profitable. We know by data that that is true. And we know that the advancement of Black, Hispanic, Latino, and other minority individuals, that it absolutely has to be part of the business priority for the company to be successful. I also think it's important that as we talk about the culture versus folks being able to be completely themselves, is that if we set that out as a priority for folks to feel comfortable in being themselves, that we are transparent about the conversations that we're having around that, about the challenges that we may be having around that, so that we can make a difference and make sure folks feel comfortable being who they are individually.
Julia, thoughts?
Sure. I don't want to repeat all the great points Kimlin made, so I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, which is, there's a lot of unconscious bias training going on right now, as well there should be. We always need to be thinking about that. But as we talk about it in terms of people bringing their whole selves to work, I can't distance myself from my labor and employment hat that wants me to go, yeah, but there's a limit to that. And what I mean by that is simply this, that my definition of what professionalism is was created just like everybody else of every race over the time period that I've been working, right? And so I had to challenge my own biases about what people wear and what color their hair is. And I like, there's nothing better to me right now than the perspectives that the ABC, what's her name? Local newscaster who talked about her hair. So if you Google her, I just can't think of her name this morning. But it's fascinating because she talks about her natural hair and how she wears her hair and how people thought it wasn't professional or was professional. And I was like, that's exactly right. Like, I would have been biased against somebody with purple hair, like literally, like somebody who came in as a lawyer with purple hair. I would have said, wait a minute, how could you possibly be a good lawyer if you have purple hair? And it's causing me to challenge my own biases and my own thoughts about, why do I care? And the other thing about COVID is it is absolutely opening me up to the idea of people can get their work done and be competent without all of these things. I think made that evident to me in the old way, which would be, you got to be at the office, you got to do this, you got to work this much time. And like, now I'm like, I just need you to get your work done, and I need you to get it done effectively. And so there's, even I have to open myself up to that. So when you extrapolate that to everybody who's really rethinking what's professional, what's not professional, what can you bring to work, what can't you bring to work, we're all having to do that real time in examining it. And that's part of what we're doing with our diversity, inclusion, and equity program here at Mary Kay.
Lynn, another question has come in from a participant that I'll direct at you. And they want your feedback on how you start the conversation with employees who don't want to open up or who remain convinced, in fact, that there isn't systemic racism in the country, or continue to utter the phrase, all lives matter. What do you do? What do you say? What's some pragmatic advice?
I think one thing that's helped here is that we've circulated various articles. So we take something that's just a factual recounting of some aspect of racism, and you can't force people to read it. So you're going to have some percentage of the population whose hearts and minds you probably won't win. But there are a lot of people you can. And so that's been a useful starting point, because it's an article, everybody can read it and get together and talk about what they thought about it. And you could engage then your naysayer. Say, you read this article, why do you think it's not true? Why do you think the racism described in this situation didn't happen? And just to get that conversation going, I think that's one way to start it.
Kimlin, I see you nodding. Did you want to add?
Sure, I would love to. Just exactly what Lynn is saying, so at Bank of America, what we've done is we've created these courageous conversation toolkits, right? We feel like folks should be on. We can't assume that folks feel comfortable and know the right approach to engage individuals on an sometimes uncomfortable conversation. And so we've created two toolkits, one for managers and one for individuals. And it's very detailed, and it goes into expectations. Do not expect everyone to be engaged and to be open right off. Expect that there would be folks who are uncomfortable. Expect that it may be emotional. And it just goes through expectations, how to extend grace to one another and listen, and just how to facilitate dialogue and conversation so that everyone feels included. Not, I think the challenge sometimes here and where we are is that, there's a lot of conversation around advancing economic mobility for Black and Brown and other minority individuals, which is fantastic. But I think it's also important to know when we talk about diversity of thought and diversity of perspective, that other individuals also have those same, diversity of perspective. That's also very helpful to the conversation. So making sure you create space to have that open conversation that's inclusive of everyone so that we all can learn from one another.
So we've just got a couple minutes left, and I don't know about y'all, but I just kind of feel like we're just getting started. But we're going to kind of go into lightning round, and I'm going to let each of you finish 30, 40 seconds each with a two-part question. Number one, how will we know that actual progress has been made? And number two, whether our participants are the CEO of their organization or right out of college and brand new, what is one action item that all of us can take in order to improve? Julia, can we start with you?
Sure. To answer the first question, I want everybody to really think about this. The problem we have on racial equality has happened over 400 years here in the United States. That we think we're going to fix it in 20 minutes is not feasible, right? It's going to have to be a constant thought and intentional effort to constantly progress. And so that we just got to talk about the conversation differently. I will tell you what gives me hope about that. Creighton, a point you made a minute ago, is the George Floyd thing opened up the gates, because I don't know a soul who doesn't agree that was wrong. I have not met a person. And because that door opened, they're like, wait, this stuff really does happen. It opened a door for conversations from people, just like Lynn talked about, white males who go, oh my God, I did not know this was happening. And so as we talk about going forward from this, whether you're a CEO or you're a brand new person, it really is the same answer, which is be intentional, be thoughtful, constantly educate yourself, and never think we're done. It's not oh, look, Julia's hired, we're done, we got our racial equality, which is not what Mary Kay has ever done. So thank goodness for that. But every company has to think about this as an ongoing piece of the fabric and not just something we did. It's got to be constantly woven and rewoven so that the threads don't come loose. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Fantastic. Lynn, let's go to you. One action item everybody can take. What's the marker of success?
We're going to see markers of success in terms of the data that we're collecting and increasingly making public about attrition, hiring, promotion, all of that. The one thing I would ask everyone to do is when you go to a meeting, even if it's on Zoom, look around and see, are the participants diverse? Who's in that meeting, and start questioning, how are we going about filling the people that have the seats at the table, making whatever decision we've come together for? And I think that awareness and then intentionality around trying to make sure it's a diverse group is a real starting point that everybody can do.
Wonderful. Kimberlyn, you get the last word.
Great, I'll take it. Thank you. So I'll tell you. So for the $1 billion for your commitment that we're leading at Bank of America, really quickly focus on health, jobs, small business, and affordable housing, because we know those are all key to driving wealth in minority communities. One of the main things we've been focused on in the first 120 days of our announcement is how do we measure success? What is the so what? Right? You have $1 billion that you're going to infuse and invest in these communities. So what? What does that look like in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years? And so we're taking to use Lynn's word, an intentional view around what are our measures of success. If we invest X amount into HBCUs, for example, what do we see happening with those students? What is the long-term impact on their ability to get a great job, start a great career, and have economic mobility? So we're really being impactful around what our measures will be. And what I would say as far as what folks can do on an individual level is, I always say operate within your 6 feet, operate within your span of control. What we're facing in the nation can seem huge and insurmountable, but if you do what's within your span of control, that will make a difference. All of us doing small, impactful changes, conversations, investments into nonprofits and other organizations, that's really going to make the difference over time. So I think, don't think so big, but think about what organization, what individual, who can you encourage, who you can support, that could really make a difference.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. I just fantastic conversation. Julia Simon, Kimmelyn Harris, Lynn Puckett, thank you so much for your insights. So impressive to hear what Celanese, Bank of America, and Mary Kay are doing. My last comment is, don't let the conversation end here. It's at the dinner table. It's at the board table. We all have to continue talking and, of course, offer and ask for a lot of grace. Thank you all for joining us today. Great conversation. Thank you to our amazing panelists, and we hope you all have a great Big Bang. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Fleo, and I'm the CEO of Social Venture Partners Dallas. Welcome to day 4 of Big Bang. What an extraordinary week we have had so far, and we have so much more in store for you over the rest of today and tomorrow. Speaking of extraordinary, what an amazing panel we just had. Thank you to Kimmelyn Harris of Bank of America, Julia Simon from Mary Kay, Lynn Puckett from Celanese, and especially to Creighton Webb for bringing his expertise in this subject as the moderator. We appreciate knowing all the good work that these organizations are doing here in North Texas and throughout the country and throughout the world to advance these causes and these important conversations. It is also our privilege to have worked particularly closely with Celanese through our Partner and Prosper program at Social Venture Partners, where we engage with corporate employees to bring them into proximity with the organizations that are working on the most interesting and the most effective causes of social justice in our community. We appreciate the willingness and the courage that Celanese had to give us their employees to do this important work in the community, and we invite other corporations to join us in this work as well. This morning, again, we heard from our wonderful MC, our Master of Ceremonies, Alfreda Norman, with our co-producer, the Federal Reserve of Dallas, with our sponsor who powers this event every year, Matthew Randazzo, the CEO and president of the Dallas Foundation. His words are always so inspiring, so encouraging, and so enlightening. We are grateful for the service that the Dallas community has done for all these many years, but particularly for giving birth over 20 years ago to Social Venture Partners Dallas, where none of this would be happening right now. I want to give a shout out to our amazing co-producer, the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, to Jennifer Sampson for the phenomenal event last night, for the good work that they are advancing in this community, for the social entrepreneurs who were on stage last night, the hard work and effort that has gone into all of those projects to make the world a better place is just extraordinary. But a particular shout out to Trey athletes who spoke at the conference earlier this week on justice in athletics. We are so proud of you, your performance last night, and for the big win. So congratulations to Trey athletes as well. We are grateful that you were on our Big Bang stage this year. You know, we are sad today. There's no getting around that. Today, we all would have been together at Paul Quinn College. You know, it's a historically Black college in the southern sector. It is a beautiful campus, and we would have been welcomed there by Michael Sorrell, an amazing and innovative president, and the beauty of the students interacting with us all day and meeting and hugging and laughing and drinking and eating and enjoying really important conversations and making new relationships and connecting with old friends. But that is not the world that we live in today. This is the world that we live in, and we are making the most of it, and we are going to make the most impact as we move forward. And we are grateful to you for joining us today and for the ways in which you're going to join us as a result of this conference going forward. I invite you to take the next 30 minutes to visit the marketplace and use the networking tab on the event platform. In the swag bag, there is a $500 raffle prize in there from Something Good Consulting, one of our longtime sponsors, to gift to your social enterprise winner of choice in tomorrow afternoon's Fast Pitch. Come back at 9:30 for a very special announcement from the Texas Women's Foundation and Lyda Hill Philanthropies, followed by a robust keynote conversation with Ted Bunch from A Call to Men and Rosalind Dawson Thompson. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you in just a few moments.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America,